Welcome back, truth seekers and fringe believers. You're listening to the voice of Kooky Hackett, and this is the WEHO-SHE Transmissions. This is a podcast about an unsolved case in Los Angeles involving multiple missing people that more and more folks these days are referring to as the case of the lost ones. Now, for those of you who may be new to the show, I need to tell you this is not a conventional true crime podcast, because the Lost Ones case has a lot of very deeply weird elements that the Los Angeles Police Department has flat out ignored. And that's where we spend a lot of our time on this show, talking about the things that people don't want to talk about, looking at things that people don't want to see. The WEHO-SHE is committed, though, to exploring every possible angle to this case, no matter how unconventional or unpopular it may be, because we simply refuse to accept the sanitized version of events that have been fed to the public. It's that simple. And for me, this isn't just an investigation, it's personal. Lily Murciatas was my friend, and she is among the missing. So if there is even the faintest signal buried in the noise, the faintest shred of truth in what people are calling lies, I'm willing to go dig through it to try to find it. Now, also, unlike a lot of true crime podcasts, or probably unlike every true crime podcast, we don't just talk about straightforward evidence and facts. So if that bothers you, be forewarned, but we talk about possibilities on this show, even the ones that challenge popular notions of consensus reality. Some of you listening may, at times, feel like we're wandering too far into the fringes, but history tells us that the greatest truths often lie there. Now, my questions are pretty straightforward, but they're big. What if the explanations for these disappearances aren't simple? What if there are forces at play that we don't yet understand? My goal here isn't just to dig through the shadows. I want to try to bring the truth into the light with your help. And if, in the process, we bring Lily home, well, then every strange path and every fringe theory and every impossible lead will have been worth it. Okay, a little recap. In our last episode, we spent a lot of time listening to Lily's final podcast recording, something that hadn't been made available to the public until now. And this was the last recording that she made before her disappearance. And in this episode, on this podcast, she left us with a lot of questions that many of us didn't even know to ask, and they only became more important once she disappeared. But these questions and where she pointed, they indicate the possibility of occult and/or paranormal explanations for what happened to Lily and the others in this case. This week, however, we're going to turn our attention to a very controversial figure, a man who's at the center of this case, Mori Morhart. The official narrative out there, of course, is that Mori is responsible for this tragedy. Mori is responsible for what happened to Lily and Sophie and Mig and many others. There's a little complication, though, with this conventional narrative, and it has to do with the existence of a logbook that Mori kept, which detailed his relationship with Lily and her friends, Meg Cervantes and Sophie Silver. Now, this logbook lately has been subject to all manner of interpretation and speculation, and in particular, the parts of the logbook where Mori talks about interactions that he claimed to have with a disembodied voice from someone or something named Geri. Yes, that's Geri, for those of you who are sticklers for details. And that's where we're going deep tonight. We're going to talk about Mori, and we're going to talk about Geri. And joining me for this discussion are two of my favorite members of the WEHO-SHE, my spiritual compatriots, Soren Bygaard and Penni Boles. Soren is what some might refer to as a mystic investigator, derogatorily or otherwise. but you can call him what you will. I know for a fact that Soren has an undeniably deep knowledge of paranormal lore, esoteric traditions, and the intersections of consciousness and reality. He has spent years studying historical accounts of supernatural contact, everything from ancient shamanic rituals to modern-day experiences with otherworldly intelligences. He's one of the best people I know at bridging the gap between folklore, occult practices, and contemporary theories about cross-dimensional communication. Soren, welcome.
Oh, I am so glad to be here, Kooky. The deeper we go and the more willing we are to explore these, as you call them, strange peripheries, the closer I think we'll get to finding the truth about what really happened, or what may be happening still.
100%. And rounding out tonight's triad, clinical psychologist turned open-minded researcher and my friend, Penni Boles. Penni has a background in cognitive science and years of experience working with individuals who have reported extraordinary perceptual experiences. Penni specializes in analyzing the intersection of psychology, neurobiology, and unexplained phenomena. She has studied how different cultures interpret voice hearing, which is obviously relevant to today's discussion, and she knows a lot about whether these voices are a sign of pathology or spiritual awakening, or a cognitive anomaly. Penni, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Kooky. I am so glad to be here. Like you, Lily was my friend, and I truly believe in my heart there's a chance for us to not only find out what happened, but to also find her, to find Lily, and to bring her home. So I'm just excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Load it. And that's what we're all hoping for. Okay, let's set the stakes for tonight. As I mentioned, Mori left behind a logbook, a first-person account of the time he spent with Lily, Mig, and Sophie. And for those of you who have read the logbook, you know that this group experienced a number of synchronicities that led them down a chilling path toward a destination that, sadly, they never reached. But it all began with a voice that claimed to be contacting them from across the cosmic gulf. And Mori was the receiver for this voice. Okay, obviously there's a lot we need to dig into here, but before we get too deep into Mori's experiences with Geri, I thought it might be useful if we kind of took a little bit of a step back and ask ourselves, who was Mori Morhart? I mean, what was going on in his life when all of this began? What's our take on him as far as we know or can tell from the logbook about the kind of person that he was? Soren, why don't you start, give us your take, and then Penni, if you would please, just come right along behind him and add your 2 cents.
Well, I never met him, but it's pretty clear from the logbook that Mori was a man on the edge, kind of living on the fringes. He was already in that state when all of this began. He comes across as a self-deprecating, nihilistic loner type of man, a middle-aged guy who struggled with alcoholism, who basically walked away from a career as a corporate executive and abandoned his family to live alone in this dingy bungalow in West Hollywood. He had, as far as we know, no friends, no job, no sense of purpose. Until suddenly he did.
Oh, can I just add, from everything Soren just described, which I completely agree with, from a psychological perspective, that is a potent cocktail. I mean, we're talking alcohol dependence, isolation, a feeling that life is empty and meaningless, but that doesn't mean that what he experienced wasn't real. It just means he was in a vulnerable state when it happened.
No doubt. Thankfully, soon after having these experiences, Mori did find a group of friends who were sympathetic to his situation. I'm talking, of course, about Lily, Mig, and Sophie. Penni, what's your take on the significance of that friendship?
I think it's incredibly significant. Isolation can be a breeding ground for distress, particularly when someone is experiencing something as unsettling as an unexplained voice. Having a group of friends who not only listened to him, but took his experience seriously, that may have given him a sense of stability. It's also worth considering, though, that this shared belief and the group reinforcement, those things can amplify an experience like this, whether it's supernatural or a psychological phenomenon. So Lily and Mig and Sophie, they didn't just support Mori, they became part of the experience itself.
Yeah, they did, and in some very profound ways. You know, there's been a lot of discourse from folks who think this whole thing may have been a classic case of folie à deux. Penni, could you tell us what that even means and why some people might think that?
Absolutely. Folie à deux, or shared psychosis, it's a rare psychological condition where you have two or more individuals who come together and they start to believe or share the same delusion. Typically, one person who we would refer to as the primary experiences the delusion first, and then they transmit it to others who are emotionally or socially close to them. This usually occurs in highly isolated environments where external reality checks are minimal. Now, given Mori's fragile mental state and the deep trust between him, Lily, Meg, and Sophie, some could argue that their collective experiences with Geri were an example of this, an idea taking root and gaining strength as it was reinforced within the group.
Well, that's one way to look at it, but let's flip the perspective for a moment. What if they weren't deluded? What if, instead, they were drawn together by something profoundly metaphysical, something that had already been shaping their lives in ways they hadn't yet recognized? Each of them was on a path that led to this moment. Think about it. Sophie Silver had spent years waiting for the fulfillment of a prophecy about her missing father. And Mig Cervantes carried with him unresolved trauma from his sister's disappearance at the hands of the lurker. And Lily herself was chasing something she called Deus absconditus, the hidden divine. And Mori, well, he was the very definition of a lost soul. Even Geri, the voice itself, was searching for something, as we'll soon hear. So I don't think it was a coincidence or mere folie à deux. The universe, or whatever name you want to give it, it brought them together, these people, for a reason. I mean, we could look at historical patterns again and again. Those who claim to hear voices or receive visions or experience profound synchronicities of some sort, they tend to cluster together. You can think of Swedenborg, who described hearing angelic voices as part of a divine revelation, or the early spiritualist movements where entire groups reported communicating with discarnate intelligences. Even Joan of Arc wasn't alone. Her voices guided her, but they also galvanized an entire nation. So let's just suppose this was something similar, but maybe even on a grander scale than any of those things.
I could not have said it better myself, Soren, and that is exactly where my head is at, for the record. But just to play devil's advocate, what's your response to those people who believe that all of this was just an elaborate con that Mori pulled as a way to manipulate Lily, Meg, and Sophie?
Oh, I don't buy that for a second. I've spent more hours than I care to admit studying Mori's logbook, dissecting every passage, every word choice, every seemingly trivial aside. And what I found wasn't the work of a manipulator. It was the work of someone documenting an experience so layered and so intricate and so utterly beyond what one person could fabricate that it defies conventional explanation. There are patterns in his writing, cross-references to esoteric traditions, synchronicities he couldn't have engineered. The logbook doesn't read like the careful deception of a con artist, but like an authentic testimony of a man being pulled towards something vast, mysterious, and real.
I have to agree. From a clinical perspective, deception leaves fingerprints, internal contradictions, shifts in tone, inconsistencies in narrative structure. But Mori's logbook doesn't exhibit any of those red flags. If this were a fabrication, we'd expect to see Mori positioning himself as the hero, controlling the narrative. Instead, what we get is uncertainty, self-doubt, a man questioning his own reality, That's just not the mark of a manipulator. That's the mark of someone genuinely struggling to make sense of an overwhelming experience. Now, interestingly, research into voice hearing shows that individuals who fabricate such experiences, whether for attention or control or evasion, they tend to construct very rigid, exaggerated stories. Mori's logbook, on the other hand, has this organic messiness of lived experience to it, you know? He contradicts himself at times, and he revises his theories, and he wrestles with doubt. That's what makes it so compelling.
Well, exactly. If this were some grand con, where's the motive? What did Mori stand to gain? He wasn't leading a cult. He wasn't making money off of this. He wasn't basking in attention. If anything, he was isolating himself further by documenting things no rational person would believe. That's not the behavior of a manipulator. It's the behavior of someone who stumbled into something far bigger than himself. And if we take the logbook at face value, which I do, but if we take the logbook at face value, even for a moment, then we have to ask, what was it that found him? Who was it that found him? And why?
That's a perfect segue to what I want to talk about next. So we have a man who's teetering on the edge of something. Then one afternoon, something happens that starts a process of pushing him over. And I mean that in a good way. I'm going to play now an excerpt from the logbook. It's read by a voice actor friend of the WEHO-SHE, who graciously lent his talents to help us share the logbook with the people. This is the very first time that Mori writes about hearing what we'll call for now the voice. Let's go ahead and play it.
1:11 p.m. Now here's a thing that doesn't happen often. I'm napping naked on my chaise lounge, as one does on Thursdays after lunchtime, recumbent on my side, when something drops into my ear. Plunk. The hell? I say out loud and sit up quickly. I am disoriented at first and wonder if I dreamed it. But then I realize that my normal stereo soundscape has gone mono, and there's a white noise type of thing in my right ear. I stick my index finger in it, which is stupid because all that does is push the foreign object lodged there even deeper. I lean my head to the side and whack it. Nothing happens. I reach for my cerveza, which is warm, and chug-a-lug it. There are countless terrible things that could happen to a person in this city, but this is one that I had not considered. Inside, I try to find an angle in the mirror that will let me see what's in there, which one would think is very doable, but turns out to be impossible. I cannot see what's stuck in my own head. 4:14 p.m. I have suffered long enough. It's time to 86 this bastard. Picture me. I'm standing in front of my bathroom mirror, bare-bellied, wearing boxers, sipping vodka. Down goes the glass, up come the tweezers, and I insert the metal tips into my ear. The stainless steel makes contact with the unknown foreign object. There is a scratchy, crunchy, solid tap, tap, tap. I tilt my head so that my ear is facing downward. Gravity plus tweezers equals freedom. But then, at the moment of extraction, a thought invades my mind space. It is in me, but not of me, and it says, "My name is Jeremiah Retravari." I pause, because that is definitely not my name, which means it's not a thing I should have thunk, and yet I did. Slowly I withdraw the tweezers. I squint at my reflection. I wait to see what happens. And what shall I call you? This time it's more substantial than a thought. It is a resonance, a vibration from within, like someone addressing me from the other side of whatever's fucking stuck inside my ear. I would commune with you. Commune with me? I shake my head at my reflection and wag my finger in the mirror. I know better than to commune with disembodied voices. It never ends well. And I may be an idiot, but I am not a fool. Commune with me. Fuck off, I whisper, and reinsert the tweezers with a vengeance. I secure the foreign object with the pincers and pluck it out with a soft plop. Well, would you look at that? I mutter. It is a mid-sized elderberry. brown and purple, waxy, ragged, which must have fallen from the branches up above me while I slept, landing smack dab in the center of my ear hole. I mean, what are the odds? I hold it between my thumb and forefinger, relishing the silence, which I once more hear in full surround sound, grateful that the disembodied voice has gone and done what I suggested. You see, I tell myself reproachfully, it was just the goddamn elderberry speaking.
And just like that, Geri was in Mori's head, physically and metaphysically.
You know, Kooky, this could be seen as a properly straightforward example of what some people would call an invasive thought or an auditory hallucination. But what strikes me here is Mori's reaction. He immediately resists it, and he tries to rationalize it away. That's classic denial. When people first experience something outside their framework of reality, the brain's first instinct is to make it fit, and many people that hear voices, they start out trying to explain their experiences in conventional terms, and then eventually they start to realize that those explanations just don't hold.
Right, exactly. So Mori doesn't just accept it because it doesn't comport with his notions of what's normal. Some people embrace their voices, but Mori, he wants nothing to do with it, at least not initially.
Exactly, and that's significant because research would tell us that how a person responds to hearing a voice can really shape the entire experience. And actually, in many cultures, hearing voices isn't necessarily seen as a sign of illness. In fact, some cultures even view it as a spiritual gift, like an ancestral connection. But in the West, it's almost always framed as pathology. And Mori, being the former corporate executive and cynical guy that he is, immediately interprets it as something to be shut down.
And, to be fair, I guess most people in our culture would say, you're damn right, you ought to shut that down. A voice in your head? Get rid of it. For those listeners, explain why that might be a big mistake.
Well, some researchers suggest that voices like this, they really function as externalized aspects of our own subconscious. Carl Jung talked about the concept of the daemon, a guiding intelligence that isn't really separate from the self, but it's kind of a deeper part of the self which is trying to break through. And if that's the case, then we could think of Mori's rejection of Geri as kind of like an attempt to reject a part of himself. But, that does lead to an important point. I think we should also consider trauma here. Auditory hallucinations are common in people with unresolved trauma, and Mori's past, his estrangement from his family, and his excessive drinking, and his nihilism that we talked about, these are all signs of a person who might have been struggling with really deep, buried conflicts. It's possible that Geri was a manifestation of that, a part of something important within himself that was trying to speak.
That alone is a really good reason to listen to these voices. On the other hand, though, instead of coming from within, maybe sometimes these voices really are something from beyond, something that's breaking through the static. Soren, what's your take?
I'm glad you put it like that, Kooky, because throughout history there are cases of people hearing voices from beyond, whether divine or alien or supernatural. They hear voices, and I mentioned earlier Joan of Arc, a peasant girl in medieval France who claimed to receive direct guidance from saints and angels. These voices ultimately led her to command armies, literally, and change, the course of history. And there's also Socrates, who he described an inner voice that never told him what to do, but warned him what not to do. Then we have the writer, Philip K. Dick. His voice came in the form of an overwhelming presence. He called it Valis. I know you know what that is, Kooky, but for your listeners, vast, active, living intelligence system. This sentient intelligence that flooded his mind with knowledge, and on one occasion gave him a warning that he claims saved the life of his young son.
Good point. So when you look at these cases as a group, do you see any patterns?
Well, I think these voices are often drawn to people who are in states of heightened vulnerability or altered consciousness. Joan was a deeply religious peasant who lived in an era of mysticism. Socrates was a philosopher, constantly questioning reality. And Dick was experimenting with substances and diving deep into metaphysical thoughts.
That tracks with modern research into voice hearing. People in states of intense focus like this, or people in states of distress or altered perception, whether that's through trauma or meditation or even psychedelics, they often report experiences like this. And Mori's life was unraveling when Geri appeared, and I don't think that timing is a coincidence.
But what's interesting to me is that in all these cases, the voices aren't just haunting, they're communicating. They're trying to convey important knowledge, things that have the potential to alter the course of history, like Soren was saying, or even save a person's life. Which brings us back to Mori and Geri and this important question. Soren, you asked it earlier. What did Geri want? Well, we know that Geri kept reaching out to Mori and that Mori continued to resist, but eventually they did begin to interact. Or, as Mori and Geri would put it, they communed. So again, the question here is, what did Geri want? And we wouldn't even be able to answer that question if Mori had refused to interact with Geri. In fact, there are subsequent entries in the logbook, lots of them, where Geri tries again and Mori continues to just ignore him. But Geri was persistent. And you could say he was insistent. He just kept coming back. He kept trying until finally, one night, Mori finally spoke back. And that moment, that night that Mori talked back, it's captured in the logbook, and I want to play the excerpt now, then we can discuss it. So this is the first time Mori and Geri have something that begins to resemble a conversation. Let's listen.
10:01 p.m. Picture me. After drinking nearly 2 liters of vodka, I am sprawled out on my sofa while the sun sets, watching my fen-den spin, too jelly-boned to make it to the bedroom. Then, as my eyelids start to droop, my passing out is interrupted by the sound of a faint hiss. My eyes flick open. I sit up. There is definitely a hiss, soft and subtle like a small snake sibilating. I stand up and sway. Is it a gas leak, maybe? This is what I'm thinking as I weave my way around the room, placing my ear against first one wall, then another. But everywhere the hiss persists unchanged. I stumble into the kitchen thinking stovetop or oven maybe, but they're both turned off and the level of the hiss remains the same. I lumber onto the back patio. It doesn't matter. No matter where I go, this weird, persistent hiss, it follows. And then, emanating from within the hiss, I hear a language rising, words formed in a foreign tongue, alien and strange, yet somehow my synapses understand them. I would commune with you. Ah, damn. So that's what this is. I'm having an elderberry flashback, which when you're as drunk as I am is kind of funny, the idea of such a thing. I chuckle, shake my head, and go inside. This is no big deal. It'll fade as I pass out and sober up. Back inside, I collapse onto the sofa, and the hiss again proceeds to form a statement spoken in exotic gibberish that's instantly transmuted into English. My name is Jeremiah Ritrovari. Damn, I'm drunk. This is so ridiculous. I decide to mock the situation. My name is Jeremiah Red Ferrari, I slur. That's not even a real name. Way too many goddamn syllables. If my name was Jeremiah Red Ferrari, I would definitely shorten it. Use a nickname or whatever, something easy. Say like Geri, maybe. Geri, that's it. Geri Elderberry. I roar with drunken laughter because I kill me. Geri Elderberry. Hilarious. So be it. And what shall I call you? Since this is not an actual disembodied voice, and only my own crapulous imagination speaking in tongues, I figure what the hell. Me? I say with a shit-eating grin. My friends just call me good old Mori. I start laughing again because it's funny, because I don't actually have any friends, and Geri Elderberry is a nickname I invented for an imaginary person. I would commune with you, Mori. I'm sure you would, I say. Right now, Geri Elderberry, I'm just trying to pass out.
And there it is. I think this is a pivotal moment because before this, Geri was just an unwelcome anomaly. But now, Mori has engaged. It's the first time he actively responds rather than ignoring or dismissing the voice. And that shift from passive to active, I think, changes everything.
This is a really important and interesting psychological moment. Research on auditory phenomena shows that the way a person interacts with a voice can actually shape its nature over time. The moment Mori stopped ignoring Geri and responded, even sarcastically, he did kind of open the door for a different kind of interaction.
So what you're saying is just the act of talking back, of acknowledging Geri like this, might have reinforced his presence?
Exactly. Some voice hearers described their experiences evolving the more they engaged, and in Mori's case, even though, yes, he was mocking it, he still established a form of dialogue, and that matters.
Yes, it does matter. And it lines up with what we see in folklore, in spiritual traditions, and even survival psychology. The moment you interact with an unknown presence, whether it's a spirit or a guide or something else, you enter into a relationship with it. And in Mori's case, the way he responded might have influenced what Geri became.
That's a big idea. Are we saying that Geri wasn't something Mori perceived, but something that reacted to him?
Possibly. There's this phenomenon called the third man factor. It's well documented. You hear it among mountaineers, sailors lost at sea, even astronauts. In moments of extreme isolation or danger, people report a presence that offers guidance. Sometimes it's a voice, sometimes it's just a feeling. But what's fascinating is that this presence often adapts to the person's needs.
Right. In cases where the voice is helpful, it tends to be encouraging, almost protective. But in cases where a person feels threatened by the voice, it can become darker, more antagonistic. That's why Mori's reaction here is so important. He's engaging, but he's also dismissive. And if voices can evolve based on interaction, then we could ask, well, how did that sarcasm and rejection affect Geri?
Which raises another question. Was Mori shaping Geri, or was Geri shaping Mori?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. If we assume for a moment, or believe, as I do, that Geri wasn't just a trick of Mori's mind, if it had some kind of independent existence, then it's possible that its persistence wasn't just a quirk of auditory perception. It was intentional. Geri wanted something.
And it's my contention that what's most significant about this interaction is the fact that they each told the other their name. For listeners who may not be familiar with why this is a big deal, Soren, fill them in.
Oh, yes, well, naming is powerful. Many traditions teach that naming something gives it a form, gives it existence. Spirits, gods, even entities described in UFO lore, once named, they become something you can't ignore. Mori didn't just hear a voice, he named it. That act alone is transformative. Geri went from a fleeting thought, this disembodied whisper, to something distinct, something with identity and intent. And once that threshold was crossed, there was no turning back.
You know, that idea isn't just folklore. It's deeply embedded in mystical, religious, and even psychological traditions. In many indigenous cultures, shamans undergo rigorous training before they're entrusted with the true names of spirits, because to speak the name is to invoke the entity's presence. And in Kabbalistic traditions, divine names are believed to hold the key to creation itself. And in modern esoteric practices, calling upon a named entity can initiate direct interaction with the unseen. Even from a neurological perspective, naming has really profound effects on cognition. Research into voice-hearing phenomena suggests that when people assign names to the voices they hear, whether in spiritual experiences or psychiatric contexts, it often changes the nature of the interaction. Studies show that those who name their voices can gain a greater sense of control over them, and in some cases, the voices become less hostile. This aligns with the misattributed inner speech theory. This is this idea that it posits that naming an internal auditory experience can solidify it into something that feels external. There's something else about this exchange that I find psychologically really interesting. Mori didn't just name Geri. He kind of did it in jest, like before. He tried to make it trivial, a joke. You sort of touched on this a minute ago, Kooky. That's a common way people cope with cognitive dissonance. If something is too unsettling to fully process, humor becomes a defense mechanism. Geri, on the other hand, certainly wasn't joking, and I think he seemed to take the whole thing very seriously, almost with a degree of sacredness, immediately seeking to commune with Mori right at that point.
Totally. And we're going to get back to that. But that does seem to have been one of Mori's coping mechanisms, in addition to the alcohol, using offbeat humor to distance himself from things. But it's interesting, because the voice refuses to be dismissed. He ignores, he pokes fun at it, and it just sticks with him.
Yes, and we see this pattern in mediumship, in spirit encounters. Voices don't just disappear when ignored. They find ways to adapt.
There's another neurological aspect to this. The brain thrives on patterns, on filling in blanks. So when a voice emerges from nowhere, the brain might try to assign it meaning, maybe even an identity.
I find this whole discussion fascinating because what we seem to be saying here is that to properly understand this whole situation, we need to look at it from multiple perspectives and through the lenses of very different disciplines.
Absolutely. I find that to be the case with almost everything in my life.
Me too. Okay, now it's time to get to the heart of this conversation. So far, we've listened to Mori's initial encounters with Geri, which were limited and barely even qualify as interactions. You could say their relationship didn't really begin, however, until one night when Mori went into his backyard and smoked a special cigarillo given to him by our own dear Lily, who correctly sensed that this man was in need of a serious vibe shift. And Lily's cigarillos contained a special blend of cannabis and low doses of the organic psychedelic substances psilocybin and salvia divinorum. This seems to have done the trick. Let's hear how Mori describes the experience in his logbook.
11:11 p.m. Picture me. The sun sets over Hollywood. I'm a silhouette on my back porch. Got my makers and my MacBook on the table. I flip the lid on the small blue box and select a cigarillo. I take a whiff. I like it. Smells like skunky, sexy heaven. Moment of truth. Maybe even change my life, that's what Lily told me. Prop it between my lips like I'm a rebel without a cause. Hold a flame up to the end and inhale deeply. It sizzles and crackles. Tiny embers sparking. Hits me like a mallet on a gong. There's a ringing in my ears, pressure building in my head. Vision like I'm swimming underwater. The ringing rises, the pressure mounts, and I'm beginning to regret this. Don't know if I can take it, start to panic, because this trip is gonna pop. Whoa, shit! I yelp and almost fall out of my chair. There's been a neurochemical discharge in my head, and now the world is different. The ringing's been replaced by the chant of singing crickets. I can feel the breeze blow through my ears, in one side and out the other, all sinus cavities cleared of their congestion. The swimmy vision's gone. I have never seen more vividly or strangely. Every object glows lit from within, a world of super-saturated colors and sharp contrast. At last. That's a good way to express the relief I feel right now. Except I'm not the one who actually expressed it. I stay very still. My backyard has been painted by Van Gogh. I wait to see what happens. And then I hear it again, a man's voice speaking clearly just over my left shoulder. I would commune with you. Startled, I leap out of the chair and turn to face him, expecting doom portender, prepared for mortal combat. But no one's out here with me. Just low-slung moonbeams pulsing. Pools of shadows deepening. A white cloud of cigarillo smoke reminds me that I'm tripping. Commune with me. I take it back. Yes, I may be tripping, but there is definitely someone out here with me. And somehow, some way, this lurking person is repeating things which up till now had only been spoken by the imaginary voice of Geri Elderberry. But it can't be Geri because this voice is not embedded in a thought. It's not contained inside a hiss or burst of static. It is clarion. It is Dolby, as if he's standing inches from me. It is the voice of someone hiding in the shadows. Hello? I whisper softly. Hello, the voice says back. I spin again and swipe at the thin air. Slowly, trembling, I walk around the yard. I look under the hedges. I peer into the treetops. Every leaf and blade of grass a wonder. Is someone here? I whisper. Yes, it is the one that you call Geri. I spin again, but again there's no one there. Expose yourself, I squeakily demand. I mean, show yourself. Don't expose yourself. Your face, I want to see your face. Come out and let me see you. I cannot. I spin again. So much spinning, starting to get dizzy. Why not? Because I am not where you are. It is very creepy to hear someone say directly into your left ear that they aren't really there. I take a deep breath and try hard not to panic. Just calm down, I tell myself. You took a giant hit of Lily's cigarillo, and whatever it's been laced with is having its way with you right now. Amplifying figments of your imagination, that's all. Making them seem real, but they're not real. There's no such person as Geri Elderberry. You are dealing with a psychedelic construct. Commune with me while there is time. I sit back down and focus on my breathing. Relax now, it's okay, I tell myself. Instinctively, I know that my usual tactic of ignoring Geri's voice won't work tonight. If I dig my heels in, things won't go well. I'm going to have to ride the wave. This trip is going to take me where it takes me. You sound like you're right here, I say, wiggling my fingers in the empty air around my ear. I am not. Where are you? In the hinterlands of an island called Sonata, beside an ancient well. From here I have been calling. I would commune with you. That's a lot to unpack. This psychedelic construct's guns are blazing. Just engage it lightly, Mori. Nice and calm now. Easy does it. What are you? I'm a 412th generation WEHO-SHE esotericist. I would commune with you. When your neurochemistry has been gong-struck the way mine has, your brain comes up with all sorts of crazy things. I just nod like, oh, that's what you are then, 412th generation WEHO-SHE esotericist. Like I know what the hell that is. And then I ask the thin air, but, I mean, are you human? I'm flesh and blood like you, a corporeal inhabitant calling to you from across the cosmic gulf. Shall we commune? Why are you... What do you want to commune with me about? You possess important information I've been seeking. I wish to extract it from you. Commune with me.
And there it is. This isn't just a random auditory interference anymore, or a sarcastic, drunken encounter. The voice is clear and loud, no doubt because of the psychedelic influence. Here we have a dialogue, though, and we find out a little bit more about who Geri is, where he's from, and we find out that he does indeed want something from Mori. And he wants to obtain this information through something he calls communion. There's a lot to get into here. I'd like to start first, though, by digging into the psychedelic aspects of this encounter. What's your take on this, Soren?
Oh, well, I find this fascinating. In mystical traditions, substances like cannabis, psychedelics, and even fasting have long been used to thin the veil between the physical and the non-physical. Mori's altered state wasn't just making him hallucinate, it was tuning him to a different frequency. We could think of it like that. And throughout history, cultures worldwide have used entheogens to facilitate encounters with non-ordinary consciousnesses. The Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece involved a psychedelic brew, likely kykeon, which initiates claimed allowed them to experience the divine. Indigenous Amazonian tribes use ayahuasca to enter visionary states where they commune with spirits and ancestors or even sentient plant intelligences. And in Tibetan Buddhism, fasting and prolonged meditation have been used to induce altered states where practitioners report communication with bodhisattvas or celestial beings. So I think what's happening here with Mori mirrors these traditions. His experience aligns with what modern research tells us about the nature of psychedelic perception. Substances like psilocybin and DMT, for example, create hyperconnectivity in the brain, particularly in regions that are responsible for pattern recognition, memory, and meaning-making. So this allows for the emergence of highly structured, coherent, and often deeply symbolic experiences, ones that many who partake describe as encounters with independent or autonomous entities. And there's also a fascinating parallel here with the bicameral mind hypothesis proposed by Julian Jaynes. He theorized that ancient humans might have routinely experienced hallucinated voices, which they interpreted as divine or supernatural commands. These voices, he suggested, came from a different mode of consciousness, one where the mind's hemispheres communicated in a way that modern cognition just doesn't allow for any longer. And under psychedelics, though, it's possible that Mori was reverting to a similarly altered cognitive state, one that permitted an externalized voice like Geri's to take form.
So in your opinion, was Mori simply experiencing an exaggerated internal projection, or did his chemically altered consciousness truly allow him to perceive something beyond his usual grasp?
Well, in shamanic traditions, the distinction wouldn't matter. What matters is the knowledge gained, the transformation that it sparks, and we, of course, know that this night would mark the beginning of profound transformational change in Mori's life. After this, there's no going back. He'll never be the same again.
Penny, what are your thoughts?
Well, this totally aligns with what we know about perception. Psychedelics don't just create illusions, they really shift how the brain processes reality. In fact, some researchers think that they allow the mind to bypass its usual filters, and so they expose patterns and connections that are always there, but we usually just ignore them. And this is where we start seeing parallels with Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance theory, the idea that minds can tap into shared fields of consciousness. So Geri claims to be external, right? And Mori's altered state seems to have put him in the right resonance to receive it. There's also this cognitive model called the predictive processing theory, which talks about how our brains aren't passive receivers of reality at all, but they're constantly predicting and refining what we perceive based on our prior experiences. And then what psychedelics do is they disrupt these predictions. They kind of allow for novel perceptions to emerge, including voices that might not normally break through. And this could explain why so many ancient cultures have used altered states to commune with spirits or to receive prophecy. Now, on top of this, research into altered states and voice hearing suggests that psychedelic-induced auditory phenomena tend to be more structured and coherent than typical psychotic hallucinations. So if you look at studies on DMT or on psilocybin, for example, experiences, these subjects frequently report conversations with what appears to be autonomous entities, ones that, kind of like Geri, express intent and agency. But what's particularly striking is that these encounters often follow a similar pattern. The entities will introduce themselves, they will establish rapport, and then they start to impart information or make requests, just as we see with Mori and Geri.
Totally. So let's talk about it. Geri says he's flesh and blood, a quote-unquote corporeal inhabitant just like Mori, just like us. And he's located on an island called Sonata, talking to Mori through some sort of ancient well.
In the hinterlands, he says.
Yes, exactly. The hinterlands. What do you make of that, Soren? This is pretty far afield of most psychedelic experiences that I've had, or any accounts I've ever heard of.
It is. And that's what makes it so compelling. Typical psychedelic encounters tend to be fluid, symbolic, highly personal. Visions shift around, they morph. Things come and go and appear and dissolve. But here, we have something different. It's a structured, consistent narrative. It's an entity that seems to have continuity, and that's rare. It suggests we're dealing with more than just random visual noise or archetypal projections from Mori's subconscious. This also ties into parapsychological studies on clairaudience, where voices are perceived not as internal monologues, but as external communications from otherworldly sources. Some mystics and occultists, from Swedenborg all the way to modern mediums, describe these entities as independent, intelligent, and persistent. So if Mori's experience fits into this lineage, then what we have isn't just a psychedelic hallucination, but a full-fledged contact event. The question then becomes, as I keep asking, what is the true nature of the communicator, and what does he or it really want?
Well, he says his true nature is that he's flesh and blood like us. Do you believe him?
Well, that's the paradox, isn't it? On one hand, if Geri is truly corporeal and communicating across space through some ancient well, then we're talking about a technology or a natural phenomenon far beyond what we understand. Remote consciousness projection, quantum entanglement of minds, these ideas sound like science fiction, but history is littered with accounts of seers and mystics claiming to receive messages from distant lands or even other realms. But there's another angle, Kooky. What if Geri believes himself to be flesh and blood, but his reality is something else entirely? Many esoteric traditions describe entities that exist on multiple planes simultaneously. The ancient Hermeticists spoke of thought forms, beings that exist through sustained mental energy, capable of manifesting in ways that blur the line between mind and matter. If Geri originates from such a place, it could mean Mori's perception of him as corporeal is accurate within a certain framework, but not necessarily within ours. And then, of course, there's the deeper, unsettling possibility. What if Mori is dealing with an entity skilled in deception? Many historical accounts of spirit contact warn that not all voices tell the truth. Trickster spirits, jinn, even some depictions of extraterrestrials, they often present themselves as familiar, as something we can understand, even when their true nature is beyond human comprehension. So, do I believe Geri? I believe he exists, but the nature of that existence, I don't think we know enough to answer that for certain.
What do you say, Penni?
Well, I think if we take Geri at face value, then what Mori is experiencing is a real-time reciprocal communication with an external consciousness. That's my take. But the question remains, what kind of consciousness? I mean, neuroscientific research would say that altered states can make the brain more receptive to signals that it would normally filter out, as I was just saying earlier. Some researchers studying auditory hallucinations have found that certain voices exhibit consistency and intelligence, and even present new information beyond what the experiencer even consciously knows. There are actually documented cases where people hearing disembodied voices have received verifiable knowledge. For example, there's a well-known case of a British woman whose auditory hallucination led to the discovery of a brain tumor that she was completely unaware of. So if Geri is providing Mori with insights that he couldn't generate on his own, then that shifts the discussion from mere hallucination to something more complex, in my opinion. Now, another way to look at this would be through the lens of something called intersubjective reality. If multiple people experience Geri in similar ways, as we saw with Lily and Mig and Sophie, then I think we're dealing with something that extends beyond Mori's personal consciousness. And in psychological terms, that may function like a shared delusion, but in a metaphysical framework. So it could indicate contact with a broader, transpersonal intelligence. Ultimately, whether Geri is flesh and blood or an emergent consciousness from Mori's mind, the key thing is the impact of the interaction. If it fundamentally alters Mori's trajectory, and by extension the lives of the people around him, which it does, we know this, then it's not something that we can dismiss as just another auditory anomaly.
This reminds me of a podcast I listened to recently called the Telepathy Tapes. Penni, are you familiar with this?
Oh, sure, I love it. It's a wonderful exploration of cases involving nonverbal individuals who demonstrate what really does appear to be telepathic abilities. I mean, what's so fascinating about this is that these children, who most people assume have limited cognitive function simply because they can't speak, but they've been observed spelling out thoughts that they shouldn't logically have access to. Some of them have even demonstrated an ability to read minds. You have to listen to the podcast to understand what I'm saying here and to understand how it's treated very seriously. But they describe unseen images or they recognize languages that they were never even taught. So it's really fascinating. But that kind of lines up with the emerging research in cognitive science and consciousness studies, where some of the theories suggest that language may be an overlay on a deeper, more fundamental mode of communication, one that exists outside of verbal speech. So Rupert Sheldrake's concept of morphic resonance comes into play here, which is what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and for listeners who aren't familiar, what is morphic resonance?
Well, it's the idea that minds can access shared fields of information beyond conventional sensory input. The cases highlighted in the telepathy tapes kind of suggests that some individuals, particularly those less bound by traditional modes of communication or interaction, that they might be more attuned to these fields. It also raises questions about how perception is shaped by expectation. If society assumes that someone without speech lacks intelligence or awareness, well, we may be closing ourselves off to recognizing other ways of knowing. And that's kind of relevant to what we're discussing with Mori, I think, because if Geri exists on a different cognitive frequency, Mori's ability to receive his voice might not be an anomaly. It might be a latent ability activated under the right conditions.
Those were my thoughts as well. Okay, so we have Mori fully dialed in now, and he's interacting with something that claims to be a flesh and blood person like us, but this person says he's located across the cosmic gulf on an island called Sonata. We'll need a separate episode, I think, to dive deep on all of that. But what I want to talk about right now, while I have the two of you here, is the fact that Geri isn't trying to impart important knowledge to Mori. Instead, he believes Mori has important information for him. Before we talk about what that information is that Geri actually wants, I'd like to hear your thoughts about this inversion of the typical mystical encounter.
Well, this flips the script entirely. In most traditions, mystical beings, whether they're spirits or gods or interdimensional entities, they're the ones with wisdom to bestow upon humans. But here we have Geri, an apparent corporeal being from another realm, seeking something from Mori instead. This suggests a form of dependency, as if Mori holds a key to something that Geri can't access alone. There are precedents for this in esoteric traditions. Some occultists believe that human consciousness itself acts as a beacon, drawing in otherworldly intelligences that seek collaboration or even symbiosis. Swedenborg wrote extensively about spirits that needed human intermediaries to fulfill their own agendas. And even certain UFO contactee cases describe beings that require human participation to achieve their ends. So if Geri is reaching across the divide for something only Mori can provide, we have to ask why Mori And what does he possess that Geri lacks?
I think that's a really good question, and it ties into an important psychological angle. In many cases of auditory phenomena, whether hallucinatory or spiritual or whatever, the perceived entity often reflects something latent within the experiencer. If Geri isn't here to guide Mori, but rather to extract something from him, then it suggests a reversal of the usual teacher-student dynamic. And from a neurocognitive perspective, this could indicate that Mori's subconscious is externalizing a deep internal truth, using Geri as a means of surfacing it. Do you understand what I mean? But if we entertain the idea that Geri is truly autonomous, then this aligns with certain models of telepathic or cross-dimensional contact where information flows in multiple directions. So rather than Geri merely being a voice in Mori's head, this is an interaction, and it's one that hints at a broader, reciprocal exchange of knowledge across realms.
And not just an interaction. Geri refers to it as a communion.
And that word carries weight. In mystical traditions, communion isn't just conversation. It's a merging, a shared state of being. In occult and esoteric practices, true communion often implies an exchange of energy, an exchange of wisdom, even an exchange of identity. In the Hermetic tradition, for example, communion with higher intelligences was sought through ritual and invocation with the belief that such entities could offer knowledge or even transformation, but only if the seeker was also offering something in return. We see similar ideas in spiritualist traditions where mediums enter altered states to act as conduits for discarnate beings. Swedenborg described his communications with spirits as an immersive process where he felt their thoughts rather than simply hearing them. If Mori and Geri were engaged in true communion, it suggests Mori isn't just receiving messages, he may have been transmitting something fundamental about himself, something Geri needs, and vice versa.
And I think that's an important distinction, because communion implies a bidirectional flow. And that makes this way more complex than just a standard auditory hallucination or some sort of imagined projection. In studies of voice hearers, one of the key differentiators between a hallucination and a more structured, anomalous experience is what's called reciprocity. Many people who experience auditory phenomena describe voices that feel autonomous and reactive. They respond with intelligence and coherence. Other people, though, say the voices just repeat the same thing over and over, or they just say chaotic things. So that's a distinction that's important. And in the neuroscience of voice hearing, there's also this idea of cognitive entanglement. And some research proposed that the way our brains work is that they predict reality. They don't just interpret it, they're actively constructing it. They shape perception in response to the stimuli that we're receiving. So if Mori's mind is engaged in communion, as they called it, rather than just mere reception, then it indicates that Geri is adapting to Mori's mental framework and Mori is adapting to Geri's mental framework. So I find this idea of communion, in that sense, kind of beautiful.
So we're looking at something deeper than just communication. This is an exchange. The question is, what exactly could be exchanged?
Right, and as we read on in the logbook, we learn the answer to that question.
Yes, indeed we do.
No doubt, that's true, we do. And for those who haven't read Mori's full logbook yet, I'll clue you in. Geri, it turns out, thinks Mori can help find two missing individuals that Geri's searching for, a woman and her daughter. In exchange for Mori's assistance, Geri offers to help Mori find a way out of his own self-destructive behaviors and nihilistic worldview.
Fascinating, isn't it? We have a corporeal being reaching across the cosmic gulf, trying to find two missing persons. Meanwhile, right here in Los Angeles, we're also searching for missing persons.
I think that's a perfect segue to bring all of this back to the case at hand, the lost ones. After all, that's why we're here. We're not just talking about voices in someone's head. We're not just dissecting metaphysical footnotes from a fringe journal of psycho-spiritual anomalies. We're talking about real people who were still missing. Lily Merciades, Mick Cervantes, Sophie Silver, and all the many lost ones that came before them who were still missing. People who had vanished into thin air. People who I believe are still out there somewhere, waiting for us to find them. And that's why Geri matters, not as a delusion or a metaphor, but as something or someone real. Geri wasn't just a symptom. He wasn't just an echo in Mori's head. Over time, he became something else, something more. He was a guide, he was a companion, and he was a friend, not just to Mori, but to all of them. Because while Mori was the only one who could hear him directly, Geri spoke through him to each of them, and they each came to trust him as much as Mori did.
And we should be clear, I think I speak for everyone at this table, Geri wasn't some benign presence in the background. His persistence is what set everything in motion, moving this group toward a common destination, even though they each had their own reasons for pursuing it.
So true. It seems like they each had something they desperately needed, but they were united in this search. I find something beautiful in that as well.
So do I, and I feel connected to it, as I'm sure each of you do too. And that's why I don't think this is just a delusion we all share. It's a calling, a convergence, and maybe, just maybe, that's why they were taken. Not because they were naive, not because they were manipulated, but because they were getting close to something that wasn't supposed to be seen.
And maybe that's what we're up against now. Not just a serial predator, but something bigger, something older, something that hides itself behind the facade of what we call a reality.
That's what keeps me up at night. And that's also what keeps me going. Because I don't believe Mori was the LA lurker. And I sure as hell don't think this case is closed. The logbook tells a very different story. A truer story, in my opinion. One that a lot of people don't want to hear, but so be it. It has to be told. And that, I believe, is why Mori sent the logbook to us. To pick up the trail. To finish what he couldn't. And look, I haven't talked about this before, but I have, let's just say, reasons of my own to believe that Lily is still alive. It's not something I'm ready to talk about yet, maybe in a future episode, but I do believe that Lily is still alive, and I have personal reasons for that. So if you're listening and you feel what I feel, this electric pull, this hunger to know, to figure out what's going on here, then please keep following, keep questioning. And even if you don't feel it, even if you're only just intrigued, please stick with us. In fact, next time on the WEHO-SHE Transmissions, I'm going to have a guest join me who does not subscribe at all to any of the things that we just talked about. He's much more of the belief that all of this can be solved with facts and logic and good old-fashioned detective work. He may be right. Obviously, I disagree with him, but I think it's healthy and worthwhile to hear all perspectives and all points of view pertaining to this case. Only then will we find the truth. So Soren, Penny, my deepest thanks to you both for joining me in this discussion and for everything you've been doing to help us find our missing Lily and all the other lost ones.
Oh, you're so welcome, Kooky, and thank you.
Yes, Kooky, thank you. It's an honor to work alongside you.
I feel the same about both of you. But alas, that's all for this discussion. We'll be back soon, but for now, this is the voice of Kooky Hackett, signing off.